15th BRICS summit has ended. Its third and the final day was really interesting because it was filled with highly anticipated announcement on the bloc's expansion this year, as well as commentary on new trade ties and currency. So as expected, one of the biggest announcements made during the final day was the leaders' decision to admit new members. BRICS leaders agreed to admit not just one country, but a group of 6 new members. Remember the famous quote by Kissinger, control oil and you control nations, control food, and you control people. So the new BRICS bloc will be in control of 80%, that's right, 80% of the world's oil production. So with that, it is no surprise that the new members of the bloc are Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. They have been invited to join. Their membership will take effect on January the 1st, 2024. With its expansion, the GDP of BRICS is now 36% of global GDP, and they now represent 46% of the world's population. So nearly half of the world's population is now part of the BRICS bloc. Even though in the beginning of the summit, the leaders were pointing out that their primary goal is not necessarily to become a rival of G7, but rather to create an environment that would benefit their developing nations, that would help them solve their issues, it has become clear that the new expanded BRICS bloc is now in a position to completely transform the world. Africa will stop exporting raw materials. Instead, they will work to create employment opportunities for their own citizens, which will be a significant boost to their GDP, as well as help them gain more revenue by exporting minerals and refined materials and finished goods, since those are more expensive to purchase. Now let's talk about oil production. This is something that cannot be ignored. With the addition of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran to BRICS, the bloc will control the biggest share of the world's oil production. They will control 80%. Oil prices impact the price of transportation, the price of goods and services across the entire world. So the BRICS countries don't want to trade using the US dollar, so not only will they control oil production, they will also be able to determine, to shape the fate of the petrodollar. The petrodollar will gradually weaken as the result of weak demand, and in turn, it will shake up the US economy, and it will shake up the economies of those countries that are heavily dependent on a strong dollar. The financing of the bloc's strategic projects will have nothing to do with the IMF or the World Bank, which again will mean further drive to de-dollarize the world's developing nations. BRICS countries will fund their infrastructure development through the New Development Bank, or in other words, the Bank of BRICS. President Lula pointed out that, quote, ambitious projects are underway in Africa for the construction of free trade zones. These projects are great opportunities for Brazilian commodities and products such as food, iron and steel manufacturers, hydrocarbons, and a variety of minerals. The addition of the new countries, as well as the bloc's trade using their local currencies, are expected to drive their sharp GDP growth in the future. Their combined GDP is projected to exceed $30 trillion. Now let's talk about the new currency. BRICS seeks to officially abandon US dollar for trade settlements. Brazil's President Lula said BRICS will move forward on trade currency without the US dollar. Lula is quoted as saying, "If I trade with China, why should I use dollars for this? Brazil and China are large enough countries to use their own currency or another base currency." In his remarks, he said that BRICS has started a working group to study a reference currency for BRICS. So it does appear that a common form of settlement maybe their ultimate goal, definitely not something that they pursue now or in the near term, but a common currency will be on the horizon once these countries establish new ties and work out the new dynamic. Presumably, by then, they will have settled their main differences, the main one, of course, being China-India relations. Lula has been one of the most outspoken supporters of the bloc's de-dollarization efforts. A couple of months ago, he said that he goes to bed thinking, why should Brazil or any other developing country trade in the US dollar instead of supporting their own currency? During the summit, Lula voiced similar sentiments multiple times, and so it is no surprise that trade in local currencies using the Brics bank, which will lend money using their local currencies, and of course limiting export of raw materials as well as controlling a truly significant portion of the world's oil production, all of those things will hurt the US dollar. It will hurt the quality of life here in the United States, among many other things, which we, of course, can focus on in my future videos. And let me know if that is something that you're interested in. Last but not least, one of the things that stood out to me was the common idea that was emphasized by the leaders of the bloc. All of them spoke about focusing on promoting peace, on promoting multilateralism and supporting each other internationally. They say, let's move away from this colonial past. Let's move away from being perceived as not good enough, and let's develop our countries in a way that would allow us to be equal participants to the extent of our capabilities. Lula's words would resonate with millions and millions of people. He criticized the world leaders for failing to advance peace in Ukraine and for the lack of attention to others' suffering. Lula said everyone deserves to live in peace. He noted that global military spending hit $2 trillion and there's no end in sight. In conclusion, it is impossible to deny that the new balance of power in the world has emerged. Yes, it is unwelcome news for the countries that traditionally enjoyed being in a position of power, but the 15th summit of the bloc just proved that the BRICS is quickly becoming the leading economic bloc. Yes, absolutely, these are developing nations and there is a long road ahead of them. But the issues that plague these nations, such as lack of transparency, government corruption, and many other things, are the same issues we see across the world.